2022 was an absolutely amazing year for movies. I watched over 100 new releases, and a few of them even made my favorite movies of all time list. But with the absolutely amazing movies also come really bad ones. So in this video, I'm going to be giving you guys my top 10 worst movies of 2022. Hey guys, what's back to the video? In this video, you guys my 10 worst movies of the year. Before I give you guys my list, let me know your list in the comments down below. And in a few days, I'll also be dropping my 10 favorite movies of this year. So subscribe to the channel so you don't miss that. But without wasting more time, let's get right into it. Starting it off in 10th place for me is Amsterdam. This was one of my most disappointing movies of the year as well. And this movie was just not good at all. I think there are very minimal redeeming factors in terms of just the mystery itself. But the fact that the cast was this stacked and they still didn't really bring anything to the table with it is really underwhelming. And at the end of the day, when you have a cast including Christian Bale, Margot Robbie, John David Washington, Robert De Niro, Anya Taylor-Joy, Rami Malek, as well as a bunch of other amazing actors and actresses, there is no reason for this movie to be one of the worst acted movies of the year. I think Christian Bale delivers a performance that's good enough to keep you entertained, but even then, the mystery is just entertaining enough, and it implements the characters just enough to where it's not like a pain to get through. But even Margot Robbie somehow just doesn't give anything near a good performance, even though she's one of the best actresses working right now. John David Washington, I really liked him in Tenet, but other than that, I haven't really found him interesting in anything else. Even Malcolm and Marie, which came out last year, this Amsterdam that he was in, it wasn't really that intriguing to me. I'm excited to see what he does in his future. Hopefully he'll get roles with actual substance, because it feels like Amsterdam just didn't have any actual substance for the actors and actresses to work with. And it's kind of prevalent when you have, for example, a scene in the movie without spoiling anything. There's a scene where pretty much every single actor in the cast, like the big ones, are all in one room and they're talking to one another. And it's somehow still one of the most boring scenes of the year. Like, having all of this talent in one room should give you enough material within the actors themselves to give us one of the best scenes of the year. But it's just that the script really sucks. Overall, it's just not a good movie at all. But moving on, in 9th place for me is Disenchanted. This is the long-awaited legacy sequel for Enchanted. And man, does this movie just not do anything for me. I am a huge fan of Enchanted. I think the animated to live action style, I think it works really well. And it was something fresh at the time. But with this movie, you get nothing in terms of the freshness. I think the concept is cool in terms of just like where they're moving the story forward. I think it's very creative. And for a legacy sequel, I think this is like one of the better stories they could have chosen. But with that being said, that doesn't mean it's a good story. I don't think this movie needed to be made. I think it basically just like flips the first one on its head, and not in a good way. None of our new characters are really that interesting. I really don't find that our main character turning evil is that cool of a story point. Nothing in this movie was really just intriguing to me personally. Now, if you were interested in that world and you really wanted to go back and you were like, oh, I like how unique this story is, I completely understand that. But for me, this just fell flat in every single aspect. And a lot of the Disney remakes or legacy sequels really aren't, unless they're like theatrically released ones. And this was a Disney Plus exclusive that I just didn't really have a fun time with. I didn't enjoy it. It was a chore to get through. It just wasn't for me. But next up on the list, in 8th place for me, is Christmas Bloody Christmas. Now, I know you guys might be thinking, this isn't really fair to compare it to other movies this year. Like, how would I compare some other movie that got a full theatrical release, has big name actors and actresses, has an actual really big budget and stuff like that? How do I compare that? The thing is, I've seen more than one of these underground indie films this year. I've seen at least 5 or 6 of them. And this one was more notably bad than literally anything else I've seen, especially in comparison to those underground films. There are so many shots in this movie where you just can't see anything because it's just filled with snow. That's all that it is. There's just the lens is filled with snow. And I get it. It might be an artistic choice, whatever. It's not a good artistic choice, okay? It makes this movie near unbearable to watch. I do think there is a cool concept here, though, with the robot killing machine. But towards the end of the movie, it just gets so repetitive. Again, I'm not going to get into spoilers because it is a small indie movie. No matter if it's on this list or not, I recommend watching it. Please support the people that make these movies, because they're just trying to do things with their career and they're working with the budget they have here, which is why I didn't want to put it on this list. but it's one of the 10 least favorite movies that I watched this year, so I'm keeping it on the list. There's no reason to take it off just because it's a lower budget movie, and I think it says a lot more for the other movies that didn't make the bottom 10 list that are lower budget indie movies with no big name actor, with no massive budget. I think it says a lot more about those movies in comparison to this one. But again, Christmas Bloody Christmas, it's just a regular Christmas movie. I mean, there's a lot of blood, there's a lot of gore. It's about a robot killing, or a killing robot Santa. It's not that good, okay? At the end of the day, I don't know what else to say about this movie. The dialogue is corny. It's not that great. The acting is not good. The premise is all right. The story and the way they play everything out is not good. Again, I just would never watch this movie again. It was a hard one to get through, and that's it. In seventh place for me, though, is Blonde. This is one of, if not the biggest Netflix release this year. Ana de Armas plays a fictionalized version of Marilyn Monroe. I really just don't like this movie. It was upsetting to watch. I actually want to make a full short form video talking about how much Ana de Armas has been undermined this year, and Blonde is the biggest part of that. This movie is, yes, artistic. I think it has a lot of great cinematography. I think the way that it goes about telling the story works within the movie, but just the fact that this movie exists and the way that they go about telling this, and the fact that okay, first of all, this movie should not have been made. It's a fictionalized version of Marilyn Monroe. It's basically taking a character it's taking a human and turning them into a character. That's what I'm trying to say. And that's why it's one of the worst movies of the year. It's just the fact that this movie is made sucks, right? That's the first point. But on top of that, it doesn't tell anything cohesive at all. I understand it's supposed to be telling the life of this character, so obviously there's going to be a lot of time jumps. It's overly sexy for no reason. There is no point in 90% of the stuff that happens in this movie. There's just no actual thing that they're trying to tell us or convey to the audience. In this movie is just pointless and it's aimless. But moving on, in sixth place is another Netflix movie called Me Time. This one stars Mark Wahlberg and Kevin Hart. I think it's actually a fairly entertaining watch. I think there are actually some funny elements to it, and that's just because it's Kevin Hart and Mark Wahlberg. But other than that, this movie literally does nothing. I mean, you're just following events, and it's kind of like another movie that's next up on this list where you have two pretty big name actors. They're just not doing anything the whole movie. It's like they just wanted to check, obviously. They're not doing anything too crazy. It's not a story that's too interesting. And there are other movies I've seen this year, for example, My Policeman, right? It's I enjoyed Me Time a lot more than My Policeman, but I can actually understand the artistic style they were going for in My Policeman and see what format and structure and how they were actually trying to be unique. Me Time just ends up being something that is very lackluster in every way, but it's still just funny enough because of the people that are in it. It doesn't make it a good movie, but it still makes it at least an entertaining watch. Next up in fifth place for me is Spirited. Now, this one is the big Apple TV Plus release of this year, and it's not a good one. I really had a hard time getting through this movie. I love Ryan Reynolds. I love Will Ferrell, and I love both of these actors together. They are some of the best comedic actors of our generation. But this movie just does too much. It's too filled to the brim. I haven't seen the original or whatever this is based off of. I know it was based off of something. I don't know what it was. I never saw it. But this movie should be able to stand on its own. And I really don't get it. I don't get this movie. I mean, it feels like they had an ambitious story, but it feels like they just packed too much stuff in. I felt like they were trying to get too many character arcs for every single character to fit into this movie. When this movie should not be 2 hours and 30 minutes. I think it's just under that. There's no reason for this movie to be that long. It should be maybe 2 hours. I'm thinking an hour 45, hour 50. Shorten it down, sweeten it down. And it obviously is a musical as well, so it's all of those things. So honestly, I just wasn't a big fan of this movie. I don't really understand why it had to be made. And that's the thing with a lot of these movies, at least there's a cool concept here. But Spirited, I just wasn't really invested in any part of this movie at all. Next up, though, in fourth place for me is Men. Now, I would say that this is a better made movie than pretty much everything on this list, including everything above it. From Amsterdam to Spirited, I think that Men is technically a better made movie than these. But the way that this movie progresses throughout it, and now looking back at my actual experience watching the movie and the story and stuff like that, this movie is horrendous. I mean, it tries to do so much, but it literally accomplishes nothing. Like, I genuinely, there was so much social commentary in this movie. I just didn't care about any of it. And there's other movies this year that tackle similar social commentaries, but they just end up like executing it like way better. I mean, I feel like like the movie is titled Men. So right away, you don't know what they're trying to talk about. Generally, you're like, okay, we're going to talk about men in some way, shape, or form. Pretty much the entire second act and on of this movie is just social commentary about how men suck and what they're doing to impact our world. And that's basically it. And they do it through this horror lens, which I think is a ballsy way to do it. And I can respect them for that. But then when you get into like the body horror elements of it, and I don't want to spoil it, but the body horror is basically like a rebirth of this person over and over and over and over and over. 3 people walked out of my theater during this movie. That tells you how bad it is. 3 people walked out of my theater all at the same time, by the way, right when the body horror stuff was starting, because it does not fit with the rest of this movie at all whatsoever. There is no reason for those elements to be in this movie. I'm going to be honest, the first, I would say first 15, 20 minutes of this movie, actually do a really good job of setting up the film. They do a really great job of setting up our protagonist, what seems to be our antagonist, and then sets up our social commentary messages. There are other movies this year that actually handle social commentary really well, like My Policeman, Tar, and My Policeman, by the way, I'm talking about this movie a lot in this video, but it's literally right above this top 10 list. But nevertheless, it still has social commentary that works fairly well, especially in comparison to Men. I think Men does a really poor job of executing on pretty much every level. It's not entertaining. It feels like, okay, we're building up to something really great. And it feels like by the end of this movie, we're going to get something really interesting with these characters. And we're going to get a really great payoff. Whether our protagonist dies or lives, no matter what happens to the antagonizing figure in this movie, we're going to get a message that actually sticks with us. You get to the end of the movie and none of that is there, and you walk out of the theater just saying, what did I watch? And that's pretty much it. Moving on though to the top 3 worst movies of 2022 in my opinion. Before I get into my top 3, let me know your top 3 worst movies of the year in the comments down below. But with that being said, in third place for me is Blackout. I'm pretty sure it's a Netflix original movie. It might not be, but it's another one of those lower level indie budget movies. And it's an action movie, kind of similar to John Wick. I mean, the poster is very John Wick-esque. But this movie literally sucks. It's like this guy in a coma, and then he wakes up and he kills a bunch of people in a hospital. There's nothing more to it. It's literally just action, action, action. Zero plot, zero story. Even the action sucks. I mean, it's cool kills in the terms of he's shooting a bunch of people and they die. It's very John Wick-esque in that style. They do some really cool, shaky camera movements. Very, very, very John Wick-esque, Deadpool-esque, Bullet Train-esque. But it just sucks. It's the worst version of all of those things. And even then, I really do feel like the story had potential with what they set up with the character in the very beginning. But again, as you keep on going with this movie, it just gets worse and worse and worse. The story gets more and more minimized, and the story really has no impact on any of the action going on. It seems like they did the action, they choreographed everything before they actually made a story. And then they're like, okay, we're going to interlink all of these story points throughout the action scenes, and then we're going to film it that way. And that it was very off-putting, and I just didn't, again, I think it all just comes down to them not interlining everything together. Even though the action wasn't bad, it was still pretty bad. It was entertaining because people were dying and there's gunshots and there's axes and there's knives, but it's not that great of choreography. Again, it just seems like a very watered down version of action scenes that we really like, especially a David Leitch-esque action style, what you see in Violent Night, John Wick, Deadpool. You get all of those vibes, but you don't really get any of that substance. In second place for me, though, is Paws of Fury, The Legend of Hank. Now, I will say, out of all of the movies on this list, I had the most fun time with this movie because it just knew what it was doing. It knew that it was stupid. It knew that it was the movie knew that it was self-aware, and so it made jokes about the characters being self-aware. They did Darth Vader-esque stuff.
I have something very important to tell you, Hank.
What is it?
I am your father.
In Star Wars, they recreated scenes from very popular movies. They knew what they were doing going into this movie, sadly, it still just sucks. I mean, the animation's cool. There's some cool like action sequences and stuff like that, but there's like no arcs. I understand it's a children's movie. I shouldn't be judging it like I judge a regular like other movies, but still, this movie, I mean, it's fun, but it doesn't have anything else. The story's kind of dumb. I mean, it's just like this guy being trained by a samurai that retired. It's your classic samurai story, but it's just stupid. Like, it's stupid, dumb fun. Sadly, that doesn't make it that great of a movie. It doesn't even make it a good movie. It just, it's stupid. Like, it's arguably the stupidest movie I've seen this year, other than our number one spot, which in first place for me is Marmaduke. I've seen nothing but people hate on this movie. I'm actually gonna check Letterboxd right now. I'm pretty sure it's like one of the worst rated movies on Letterboxd ever. The average score is a 0.9. That's the average Letterboxd score, is a 0.9. My 4 mutuals that I've seen on Letterboxd gave it half a star. Also, if you guys want to follow me on Letterboxd, it's AP_1216. I basically do reviews for every single movie I watch, like, ever, even if I can't make YouTube videos or anything like that on it. But nevertheless, back to Marmaduke. Marmaduke, it's a disgrace to bad animated movies. Like, it's even a disgrace to, like, Paws of Fury, The Legend of Hank. That's how bad this movie is. Like, the animation is so unappealing. It's disgusting. Like, the only pro to this movie is that J.K. Simmons and Pete Davidson voice characters. Like, that's literally it. Other than that, there is not a single... And even then, the voice acting, like, it's just bad. Like, everything is so bad in this movie. The story is bad. The characters are bad. The voice acting is bad. The animation is horrendous. There's no good thing about this movie. But guys, that wraps up my list for my top 10 worst movies of 2022. Let me know your least favorite movies of this year in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.